Good morning. I have Senator Richard Black with us today. We are going to be shifting our focus on the EU and their tactics in elections. And what do you have for us today, Senator Black?
Yeah, we're gonna talk a little bit about the elections in Poland. And every time we have one of these elections where it appears as though the people are about to seize some measure of control over their own affairs, we typically are surprised. We get a very bad surprise from the EU, the NATO, the whole Atlantic Alliance, and we discover that, well, certain things happen that even though the people wanted something to happen, well, then the courts managed to come in and say, oh, that, this election was illegal or whatever, or if that doesn't work, maybe they'll label one of the parties as being extremist or fascist or Nazis or any of the baloney that they come up with. And they deprive the people of their right to express themselves. And it has happened so many times. And certain of the movements, the political movements, they'll simply label them as being extremists, and they'll say, look, we won't allow them to join in a coalition, a ruling coalition, even though they come in often like second place, sometimes even when they come in first place. They just, the word comes down from the deep state that rules Europe that no, we're not going to have those. And so we'll talk a little bit about how the European Union is not a democratic organization or form of government, and how it actually functions as a tyrannical dictatorship, but with a soft image. So let's start with Poland. We've got a very important election in Poland. Poland is a powerful, important European country that borders on Russia and Belarus, Ukraine, and it's right in the mix of things. The Polish people have been involved in warfare forever, which has a lot to do with the rather exposed geography of Poland. But the people there are very resilient. They tend to be they're very intelligent. Historically, they were very conservative. But anyway, so Sunday we have a runoff election. The way that they do is the various parties put forward their candidates. They have an initial election, and the two top contenders then vie for the votes of everyone. And so they've already had that first round, and now they're down to an election this Sunday between Rafał Trzaskowski, who is described as the liberal centrist mayor of Warsaw, and Karol Nawrocki, a right-wing historian. And there is quite a difference. This is, very much like the Biden-Trump election. You've got very stark differences of position between the two candidates. Now, it is typically said that presidents have a limited role in Poland, but I think that's a bit of an overstatement. Even though power is dominated by the parliament and the prime minister of Poland, the president of Poland has very important powers. The first power is that he can veto almost any law passed by Parliament except for the budget. And the other very important thing is that he is the commander-in-chief of the army. So I'm not exactly sure why it's so often said that he's not, not a terribly important figure, because if you're the commander-in-chief of the army, you are by that alone important. And the fact that he can veto laws that are passed by Parliament it makes him I think, a powerful president. So here's the thing: the two candidates who remain standing, Trzaskowski and Nawrocki, they have starkly different visions for Poland. Trzaskowski wants to promote more abortion. He wants civil unions for homosexuals, and sort of the upending of traditional Polish Roman Catholicism and traditional morality. So he's against those things. He wants to clear a path for Prime Minister Donald Tusk, a liberal who is also a member of Trzaskowski's party. And if he can move away the veto, then he allows Donald Tusk to implement all of these liberal policies very rapidly. So you've got this very stark difference of left-wing and populist conservatism. Now, it's interesting, Nawrocki has the support of President Donald Trump. Trump has done what he is able, and foreign presidents can't always do a great deal, but he has been very helpful to Nawrocki. And so we will see what happens. Now, when they had the first election, Trzaskowski won a very unexpectedly narrow margin on May the 18th. He got 31% against Nawrocki's 30%. So they're almost neck and neck. And what's important is that the third and fourth place candidates are both pretty hard right-wing people. So they're logically, the great bulk of their vote should go to Nawrocki. And Nawrocki has already pledged to one of the other parties. He said he's made a pledge that he would oppose Ukraine entering NATO. Of course, that's what started the whole war in Ukraine and slaughtered probably who knows how many people. But he is saying that Poland would block Ukraine's entry into NATO, which really, that's probably the biggest impediment to peace right now, is the need to guarantee that Ukraine will not become a NATO power and put nuclear missiles on Russia's border. So he's also said that he would not allow Polish soldiers to enter Ukraine, and also he would not allow the expansion of EU powers. I don't know how much more power they could have. They're a dictatorship, but in any event, so that's where we stand with Poland right now.
Yeah, that's a very good point. As we spoke a few weeks ago about Romania and Georgescu, that election, and the I would say talking points that you would get in Western media about this being the the alt-right, them being the fascist, but this common denominator that I always found in these candidates is they don't want to continue this war in Ukraine. And you see this with Poland's presidential candidate as well. You know, this parroting of, oh, these rights, these poor people are going to have their rights stolen from them, but they're not talking about, you know, the poor people in Ukraine who are continually being used as cannon fodder in this war. You know, I saw this one video that really moved me. It was the conscription buses that come and they pick up the men, and it was a band of women who stood in front of the car hand in hand, and they made sure every man got out of that bus. And so I found that really moving, because you see the people are revolting against this pro-war movement that has killed their sons and their fathers, and continually wants to do so. So it's very disheartening to see that we can't all coalesce behind this, you know, trying to push for diplomacy with Ukraine and Russia, and this constant power of words when we use, you know, this fascist alt-right. You know, it's hopefully people can start to wake up to that and see this movement, this populist movement, to just try and stop this war, especially for European countries that will bear the risk if they continue on provoking Russia.
Yes. You know, it's helpful to be aware that what governments say is the objective today is not generally the truth. Usually there's another step and another step in the future. And it has surfaced from time to time that one of the goals of the deep state or the EU or NATO is the eventual dismantlement of Russia. And Russia is a tremendously wealthy nation in terms of its natural resources, its exports to the world, whether it's oil, gas, lumber, wheat, fertilizer, all sorts of minerals and metals. And so the idea is that there are people, whether they're bankers in London or hedge fund managers in New York, who look several steps forward and they say, if we could break Russia into its component parts, and if we could dominate them and go in and we could take over the wealth of Russia, then, you know, I and all of my buddies can become trillionaires, you know, and we'll be like gods on earth.
Yeah, and they say the quiet part out loud. I believe Biden said that when the war in Ukraine first started, is that, you know, we're I'm paraphrasing here. I'm not gonna don't don't knock me for not giving a direct quote, but it was, we're targeting to dismantle the Russian government and Putin's regime. And I remember
it has been stated from time to time, and then it's sort of buried. It's not frontline headlines, but you can see the whispers among the powerful global financiers that they know, you know, war is one of the most profitable ventures known to man. War, drugs, you know, it's a certain number of things where if you break down a country's form of government and you privatize a lot of enterprises, all of a sudden there's an opportunity to sweep in, buy things up for a nickel on the dollar. And that's the way that truly wealthy globalists get their power, is beating people down into submission to where they simply have no power, no voice. They're clinging to life. At that point, the financiers rush in, buy up everything, and really enslave the people. So, so yeah, go ahead, Morgan.
No, you're fine. When you had said before, Russia it has this so much wealth. What came to my mind is this also this wealth of history. You have this unified people who, I would say in America, we don't really hold our history to the standard that I feel like Russians do. One thing that I was talking with a friend of mine the other day, and they were saying, what people need to understand is in Russia, they have this legitimate fear of being invaded. They were invaded by Napoleon, and then they were invaded by Hitler. And so this constant posturing by the EU, by the West, to when they say this, and it goes over some of our heads in America, but they hear it, when a Biden sits there and says we're trying to dismantle the government, and it brings legitimate fear on their ends, where it's kind of this funny thing where Western governments are using this. Putin's going to be this imperialist. He's not stopping at Ukraine. Meanwhile, they're using this their talking points like they want to actually go in there.
It's the domino theory. It's they condemn the domino theory from the Vietnam War that if Vietnam falls, this will fall and that'll fall, and to some extent it did happen, but it was somewhat contained also. And with Russia is very much the domino theory is, if Russia is able to secure the Russian-speaking areas on the edge of their country, then the next thing they're going to be marching through the Arc de Triomphe in Paris. And, Russia does not have the population to invade Europe. It just doesn't. It's they're having fertility problems like most of the world is today, and they're going to have enough difficulty manning their own factories and farms and that sort of thing. They do not have the time or inclination to go trying to take over the world. So it's just it's just hogwash. Well, let's see. Let's just do a little bit of a recap. I think it's important to remind people of just what the EU is. Now, the EU is composed of 27 different nations that have all signed on. So you can make a little bit of a parallel to the United States, where you have the federal government and then you have the state governments. And it's very roughly that same arrangement with the EU. The EU makes the foreign policy for Europe. It's very closely tied to NATO, which decides all of the military moves, and the EU decides things like what sort of power structure you can have. I mean, electrical power. Will they follow climatism, or will they have a more practical approach? And the EU, of course, is all for climatism. In terms of morals, the EU pretty much dictates. They've dictated that you will accept abortion, you will accept homosexuality. These are suddenly government rights that they impose on the people, despite the history of traditional family values in many of these countries. Immigration, of course, is a tremendous one, because the EU has decided that they want to break up the unity of the indigenous people of Germany, of France, of Italy, and they want to water down the indigenous population with people that many of whom have been ushered into Europe by way of Turkey. Turkey is a very Islamist state that has visions of reestablishing the Ottoman Empire, which long ago well, not that long ago either, dominated huge swaths of the Middle East and North Africa, and had the desire to conquer all of Europe. And so Turkey is sitting back saying, well, look, these Europeans are so stupid that they're happy to have us dilute their population and to break up the unity of the indigenous people. We can help them. We'll send some of the most radical people that we can find and send them in. So that this is the EU. It's important for Americans to understand. The EU is not democratic. It's a very clever dictatorship. Now, the easiest way we can understand is to think, excuse me, to think of the fact that in the United States, our chief executive is the president, Donald Trump. It was Joe Biden until recently. And the ability of the people to elect the president is the source of their power over their government and their power to influence their government. And so the conservatives rose up and they elected Donald Trump, conservatives / populists. It's always a coalition. But it's important to understand our government that liberals could always stage a comeback and they could elect a president. So this is the way that Americans exert their will and influence over their own government. But the EU doesn't exactly have a chief executive. There's no one figure that you can point to and say, I want to vote that so-and-so out of office. I'm getting rid of that person. The closest thing they have is Ursula von der Leyen, who is the president of the European Commission. And she is in charge of the EU's executive branch. Now, the European Commission, of which she is the president, is not directly elected by the public. It's a very convoluted, indirect process. So suffice it to say that the Europeans have no voice in the all-powerful European Commission. But not only do they not have the power that we have to elect our own president, when you know, maybe Donald Trump is in office, but the Democrats say, well, we're gonna take control of the House of Representatives or the Senate, and we'll block what he can do. Of course, this is what conservatives did when Joe Biden was in. Well, it works a little differently under the European Union. Because even though Europeans in different countries, whether it's Germany or France, they can elect European parliamentarians. But here's the trick. The parliamentarians are not allowed to introduce legislation. So what do? Okay, if you're in the House or you're in the Senate, you introduce legislation, you push for bills and so forth. And but in the EU, they're basically a sounding board for what? The European Commission, which is unelected and not responsive to the people. So not only do you have a lack of ability to elect someone like the President of the United States, you have the lack of the ability to elect people who can go into what is like Congress. They do have a European Parliament, but again, they can't introduce legislation. So what's the deal? I mean, where do you exert your influence over your own government? Now, so you would say, well, okay, well, if we can't do anything to the big government in the sky, the European Union, well, we will influence our own government in France, in the Netherlands, in Germany. Well, they've got that figured out too, because culturally they've set up a system where whenever the people rise up against the EU tyranny, then the media starts whispering, they're fascists, they're Nazis, they're extremists. And the next thing, some sort of action is brought by the government in power, and they'll say, hey, look, this is a dangerous group that's coming up. Imagine if the Republicans were able to go into federal court and they were able to lodge a complaint and say, hey, look, the Democrats are extremists and they're communists, and we can't allow that. They're an unsafe organization. And then if the federal court said, okay, we hereby outlaw the Democratic Party. Well, where would democracy be if you could do that? Well, that's the way that it is in Germany, in France, in the Netherlands. Here you take Germany, which is a very precise situation where you have the Alternative for Deutschland, AfD party. They are a populist, Germany first party. They're very, very closely aligned with Trump, or I would say very analogous to Trump's MAGA movement. And they're made up of young, bright intellectuals. Some of them are musicians. Some of them are generals. Some of them are professors. But they're very smart people. They're quite impressive. I've met a lot of them because I've spoken in the Bundestag, which is their government building, their parliamentary building, and so you have this uprising of the people, and right away you have the German government that's in power under Merz saying, okay, well these people are extremists, and you actually have an intelligence agency in Germany that says, oh, we've got all this secret information that shows that these are kind of extreme people. We can't trust them. So it's sort of like a January 6th on steroids over there. And so they simply outlaw an enormously powerful movement. It's the second most popular and powerful political party in Germany. And this goes on not just in Germany, but it's gone on in Italy, in the Netherlands, and Slovakia, and Hungary, and then you even, if all else fails, and finally you get somebody in power, as you did in Slovakia, what happens? They try to assassinate him, and this has gone on globally. This happens. So the head of Slovakia was gunned down. He wasn't killed, but he was very almost killed by someone who favored war in Ukraine. Well, that's an interesting coincidence that it happens to have some tie into the continuation of the war in Ukraine and the fact that the government in Slovakia was turning against the war. But anyway, you see that, and globally, you could see the same thing. Bolsonaro in Brazil, he was the subject of a knife attack, very seriously knifed at the height of his power, and you look at Donald Trump, who was very nearly, I mean, just by the by the grace of God, turned his head at precisely the moment when a bullet was flying, and the bullet, instead of hitting him clear in the skull, went through his ear. And
And
then
he
you had another assassination attempt about a month later, didn't you?
Yeah, I was gonna say that one, and that man had pro-war, pro-Ukraine insignia all over his social medias. I think he had done some tours in Ukraine, if I'm not mistaken. And I know that it's just a strange coincidence, and it leads back to that. There's that narrative where you want to continue war, and that's why these people get targeted.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, we seldom get a lot of in-depth information about the people who assassinate presidents or who attempt to do it. Mm-hmm. These things happen, and I can't be too conspiratorial about it, but for whatever reason, there's never enough information. But I want to share a text that I received from a longtime friend in Germany, and he was a little boy when I was a JAG officer serving in Germany during the Cold War, and we were very close to World War III breaking out. This was during the time of Ronald Reagan, and anyway, I deliberately lived away from the Americans in a small German town, and anyway, my children were very close to a German boy. He spoke very good English, and just became a dear friend. And I've stayed in touch with him ever since. Now he's getting a bit quite a bit older, but anyway, so he writes me a text, and this particular one, he says, "I think you've already heard about the AfD. It's unbelievable what they're doing to them. The leftists say they don't want the same than 1933, but I think they are doing the same. Manipulate the news and destroy other parties they don't want." So he goes on to say, "The situation in Germany is crazy right now. Yesterday, I was looking for an apartment, and there was 10 other families, and everybody wants the apartment. It is so weird because all the immigrants, we don't have enough space to live. The rents are so high because the government pays more money for immigrants to rent an apartment. So most of the Germans cannot afford apartments. I'm sitting here and shake my head because I don't understand it." Okay, so this is from the front lines. This is not a politician. This is a fellow who is somewhat disabled at this point, physically disabled, and he's looking. But the EU requires that they break down their borders in Europe and open the doors to all of these very radical Islamist elements being poured and pushed through Turkey. Many of them came out of the war in Syria when the Assad government pushed the terrorists out. And these were the Wahhabists, the people who believed in the 7th and 8th century Islam, where a man can purchase a woman or a child, a little girl, at a slave market, and where where the belief of this particular group of Islamists is that if you do not submit, if you do not renounce Christianity, then you're to be beheaded. And this is not just, oh, we believe this, 1,000 years ago. This is, we believe this today. And so the German people, and this is happening in countries all over Europe, the German people are helpless because the EU is not a government they control. It is a government that dominates the people, and for whom the people are merely like lumps of coal to be manipulated and moved around on the globalist chessboard. And so here we see just a common man in Germany struggling to get an apartment. You can't buy an apartment because the government outbids you on behalf of people who are flooding into your country and displacing the indigenous people there. So it is a crazy thing, and Morgan, I guess we'll find out next Sunday. I caution people that logic would tell you that the populist conservative Norwalki is going to win. Logic would tell you that. But logic told you that in Romania, George Simeon, the populist conservative candidate, was going to win. And over, they have barriers. They rig elections. They use crooked courts to make people ineligible to represent the people. They have a whole slew of things. And so I think we can be hopeful. It's always a little bit risky to be optimistic when you're talking about the EU, because you're being optimistic about a tyrannical enterprise, a government that has no representative duties towards the people, and one that needs badly to be replaced.
I agree. I was very surprised about the results in Romania. It just seemed like they're, especially his platform, calling out the previous election, how they just kind of said, no, never mind, and we're going to do it again. You guys need to vote for the right person, and we're going to kick the other person off. And I saw this article recently that Georgescu has officially declared that he is no longer going to be in politics. So that was, I thought he was going to try and fight a little more about, what had happened to him, which seemed very unfair and undemocratic.
Well, now George Simeon, the one who was ousted, he's perhaps stepping back, but George Simeon is going to continue to fight on. He was the one in the most recent election.
Yes. Mm-hmm.
And so there is hope if ever the people could just get their hand around the neck of the EU and muzzle them for a bit, then you'd see this explosion of democracy and freedom, liberty in Europe. So there's a question whether it won't reach a tipping point, because the conservative movement across Europe is really massive at this point. It's so many different countries, including the biggest ones. You have it in Great Britain, in France, in Germany, in the Netherlands, in Poland, in Italy. And at a certain point, you just have to wonder, could it reach a tipping point where something happens and the people seize power? That's the hopeful me. The realistic me says, I don't know.
Well, we almost always keep hope, and hope you can join us next Saturday as we focus on the news. Thank you. Thank you, Senator.
Thank you very much, Morgan.